Wonderful to be able to speak with you today. We are here at the NATO Summit, and we will be standing for Canada's interests on the world stage. This is Canada's time. This is a time where we will utilize our diplomacy to ensure that Canada's domestic interests and economic interests are being advocated on the world stage. In addition, we must always couch that conversation in the context of Canadian values of peace, of security for civilians, and of the integrity of the international order. Three main points I want to mention. First of all, yesterday was a very good day for Canada and the Canadian economy as we finalized and signed the agreement between Canada and the EU with the Security and Defence Partnership. This is good news. Why? Because it is going to open up supply chains for Canadian businesses, and in particular, those in the security and defence industries. Canadian businesses are going to be able to operate on par with European businesses in the defense industry. We've set out a framework and additional work that is going to be done between the two countries, and businesses amongst the two regions or jurisdictions, I should say, will continue. Second is NATO. This is the first day of the NATO summit. Of course, everyone is gathering here, and Canada is here to represent multilateralism over unilateralism. We represent cooperation over protectionism. We stand for the rules-based international order that has kept us all safe since the end of the Second World War, and we will be here to voice our support for Ukraine in the short and long term. Then finally, our support in the Middle East. We will see a flight, chartered flight, leaving the region with over 100 people on board this evening. We are also assisting our allies in the region if their citizens need assistance. And I will say that we've helped over 500 Canadians in the region as a whole. So this work continues. We've deployed additional consular services throughout the region, throughout the border areas, and we will continue to be there to support Canadians and to advocate and ensure, to the best of our abilities, the safety and security of that region as a whole. We do urge all Canadians to register with Global Affairs Canada.
Please use the raise hand function. Si vous avez une question, utilisez le bouton lever la main. One question, one follow-up, une question, une suivi. We'll start with Mike Blanchfield from Politico. Mike, can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning, Minister. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. You mentioning a moment ago that we're using diplomacy on the world stage to foster our economic interests. In light of that, you had a conversation with the Iranian foreign minister the other day, and Donald Trump is on his way to the summit tonight with his entourage. What is it that your government needs to know from them about what's going on in Iran and the future impact that may have, given that events are happening so quickly? And are you going to be speaking to the Iranians or the Israelis again anytime soon?
So there's a lot in that question, Mike, but let me just take it bit by bit. First of all, my conversation with the Iranian foreign minister was very much to first indicate the need for the safety and security of Canadians in Iran. Second, to urge for a diplomatic and peaceful resolution to the conflict and a return to the negotiating table. And third, to advocate the importance of PS 752 and the victims of PS 752. It is not a regular occurrence for the Foreign Minister of Canada to speak with the foreign minister of Iran. We have not had diplomatic relations with that country since 2012. And we have declared the Iranian regime a terrorist entity in Canadian law. So it was unprecedented, but the reason for the call was very specific, and I've outlined those 3 reasons for you here. Secondly, in terms of our interests on the global stage, it is not limited to advocating for Canadian economic interests. It is to utilize our diplomacy to stand for Canadian values, one of which is global peace, one of which is the protection of civilians, and one of which is the augmentation of our domestic interests, our domestic economies, by fostering diplomatic relationships and building on our relationships with our allies and partners globally. You know, Canada, it is often said, and truthfully, is the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. Well, what does that mean? It means that we have to utilize those agreements and beyond so that we are never again 80% dependent on one economy, that being the United States. And so we have a lot of work in front of us diplomatically, but that sets out the frame within which we are operating and in which our diplomatic relationships will continue. Thank you.
Mike, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, maybe if you can, the second part of my question, I know is a bit long, on what do you need to know tonight from the Americans, given that they're in the middle of everything that's going on in the world that affects Canada?
So I and my team are in close touch with Secretary Rubio and his team. And I know at the prime ministerial level, Prime Minister Carney and President Trump are in regular communication, including within the last 36 hours. That closeness in the communication will continue, and we will have a conversation not only about the Middle East, but about NATO and our work together as a multilateral organization to further protect the rules-based international order, as well as to ensure that we are all playing our respective parts for the benefit of global safety and security. Let's remember why NATO was founded. It was founded in order to enhance the protection of the North Atlantic, but that objective has increased to reach farther geographical areas, given that global conflicts do now exist beyond the European borders. We think about the Arctic, we think about the North American continent, and we think about the Canadian population when we are here at NATO to represent Canada and also to ensure that we're doing what is necessary for the defense and security of our own country. Thank you.
With the Canadian Press.
There we go. Can you hear me now, Minister?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Yeah, no, you said the Canadian team will be talking with Trump and his folk later tonight. But we have seen Trump pushing back against Israel striking Iran after the ceasefire. So just what has Canada heard on this? And does Canada have any evidence or intelligence that Iran struck Israel first?
So Prime Minister Carney and I and our broader team and officials are continuously in dialogue with each other and our allies and counterparts about the very volatile situation in the Middle East. The news of a ceasefire was very good news, and we want to urge parties to seize this moment, to return to the negotiating table, and to have a conversation about a necessary topic, which is that Iran cannot have nuclear capacity, and there must be transparency and verifiability in that proposition. In addition, the events that are reported to have unfolded after the ceasefire are ones that do remain to be verified, and therefore I will refrain from commenting on them any further. But again, Canada's position is that parties need to return to the negotiating table, need to ensure that there is a diplomatic resolution, need to ensure that Iran does not have nuclear capabilities. We need safety and security in the region. And as I said, we urge Canadians to register with Global Affairs Canada because we are pushing resources into that area for the safety and security of Canadians. We have land transport going. We have air transport available. We are helping with consular officials at many borders, including Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Jordan, to name a few. So we are there, Global Affairs Canada, to do what we can do for the safety and security of Canadians in the region, but we do urge parties to get to the negotiating table where the conversation about a resolution can be had and finalized.
Yes, I wanted to go back to getting people out of the Middle East. You mentioned earlier that there was the first charter flight with over 100 people was leaving the area either today or it's already left. But you did mention that Canadian resources are available to help get allied nations people out of the region as well. Is that just kind of like a way of saying that there has been too much uptick or interest on flights at this point from those other 400 or so other people in the region that haven't taken this flight offer?
No, the proportion of citizens from other countries that are requesting help is minimal compared to the number of Canadians. But if there is a request, say from Australia or Spain, we will accommodate those individuals because that is what those countries have done for Canadians in the past, and we are in favor of supporting the safety and security of civilians overall. But the number of requests we're getting from other countries versus from Canadians is quite minimal, I will say. But Canada is always there to help. That is one of our signature characteristics as a country. We stand for peace and security, and we are very good neighbors.
We will now go to Stuart Benson with the Hill Times.
Hi there. Sorry, I have just the one question. You repeatedly said that Iran cannot have nuclear capacity, but given both the IAEA assessments and the U.S. intelligence assessments found that no evidence Iran was working towards a nuclear weapon, is it Canada's position that Iran's civilian nuclear program it cannot have that as well, and that's what justified these strikes?
Our view is that over the past decades, Iran has been developing its nuclear capacity. Our view is that this increases regional instability and undermines the safety and security of the region as a whole. Our view is that Iran has been calling for the destruction of one country in particular, and that is Israel, which is unacceptable. And our view is that the appropriate way to deal with this situation is for parties to return to the negotiating table to ensure that there is not nuclear proliferation and that there is transparency and verifiability in that fact.
Okay, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function. S'il vous plaît, utilisez le lever la main si vous avez une question. We'll go back to Mike Blanchfield at Politico.
Yeah, hi, Minister. On NATO and getting to the new target that'll be proposed, you said this morning that you think a re-examination of the timeline of it is appropriate. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that, especially in light of your department officials a few days ago when they briefed us seemed to indicate that the 1.5% of the new target, the industrial infrastructure component, that they seem to be indicating that Canada might already be there. We might already have that covered with other stuff that we're doing. So are we looking at really maybe another 1.5%? And what's your message to the Canadian people who will be seeing this as a competing priority now that you're the foreign minister?
Well, my first message to the Canadian people is that we heard you and we heard your support for Canada achieving the 2% target. And we will do that within a year, further to the announcement by Prime Minister Carney that will occur. That is a significant milestone, given the number of conversations that have occurred in our country over the past number of years for Canada to reach the 2%. And I will say that it is incumbent upon us all to view achieving the 2% as beneficial not only for Canada as a NATO founding member, but also for the safety and security of Canada as a whole. Let's remember that this increase in defense spending is going to augment Canada's safety. We are going to see that our Arctic is a priority. We're going to see that increasing supports for the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as defense capabilities, are number one priorities. So this is good news for Canada. Now, your question went, well, what happens over and above the 2% that Canada has committed to? And that's the conversation that leaders are here today and tomorrow to have. It's not only a question of the amount, whether it is an additional 1.5% or an additional 3% overall. It's also a question of how you break it down. Will there be flexibility in about 1.5%? Will there be a mandatory percentage increase at certain points in time? Will there be increases incrementally? And will there be a review after certain timelines, say in 2029, which is one of the dates that is being floated? So, Mike, it would be imprudent for me to opine on Canada's position prior to the conversation that the leaders of the NATO countries are going to have over the next 2 days. Let's let that conversation unfold, and let's then, as a country, ensure that Canada is on the track that best serves Canadian taxpayers, that best serves the Canadian people, and best serves the obligations that we have domestically and multilaterally as a member of NATO.
Am I getting a follow or am I on mute?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that, Minister. Prime Minister says we're in a crisis repeatedly. I think everyone acknowledges that. You've been a cabinet minister through the COVID crisis and had a key role there on vaccines and I guess many other things perhaps. What lesson are you drawing from that as you try to be Canada's top diplomat in this crisis right now?
After the Prime Minister, who is Canada's top diplomat, I represent Canada on the world stage. And the lessons that I draw from previous crises is that you have to be dogged and determined about analyzing the problem in front of you. I ask many questions when I'm being briefed, and I make sure that I have as much information possible in front of me in order to make sound decisions. I also pick up the phone and call people directly when I need information or when Canada needs to be well represented, or simply to get the views of our counterparts and allies and beyond. The examples are numerous, but if you take a look at our call log, and we do publish many of the calls that I have, you will see that I am extremely active globally in terms of being in touch with our allies, partners, and counterparts generally. And the reason for that is that diplomacy is not one and done. Diplomacy is a series of iterative conversations in order to advance Canada's needs and values on the global stage. Our needs economically, our needs diplomatically, and our interests in terms of global peace and security and the protection of civilians. That's generally my approach. And as I said, it's dogged and determined.
Okay, we only have one last question. Do you have time for one more?
Unfortunately, I think we have to wrap this one up.
Let's do one more.
Okay, we'll do one more.
I don't know who it is, but let's do one more.
Okay, so David Baxter, Canadian Press, final question.
So thanks for taking the question, Minister. And just looking outside the immediacy of NATO and the situation in the Middle East, India, another area where Canada is having renewed diplomatic ties here, looking at appointing a new high commissioner. When can we expect to see someone named, especially we've seen like recently Premier Scott Moe and Danielle Smith floating Brad Wall as a potential high commissioner. So when will Canada be selecting that new high commissioner for India?
Okay, so thanks for that question. Let's just take a step back, as I always do, to make sure that we recognize that this is a relationship that really needs to be grounded in Canada's priorities, which include, at the top, the rule of law. And when I say the rule of law, I don't just mean the respect for laws. When I say the rule of law, I mean adherence to the institutions that promote and support our democracy. Those institutions include the RCMP and courts in this country, both of which are independent of the Government of Canada. So against that backdrop, the backdrop being the adherence and support for the rule of law at all times, we will take this relationship step by step within the context of the law enforcement dialogue that is occurring at the level of those independent organizations. In terms of your precise question, therefore, the appointment of high commissioners or additional steps that will be taken to re-engage this relationship will be forthcoming, but this is a step-by-step approach, and the conversation exists not just at my level, but also at the Prime Minister's level. So again, we have completed the G7 last week. We are in the middle of the NATO summit, coming on the heels of the EU-Canada summit yesterday. We are taking this step by step, and right now our focus is on the NATO summit, standing for multilateralism, working with our allies and partners, certainly as a founding member of NATO, to ensure that we're representing Canada to the very best of our ability, the very best people in the world. We're representing you to the very best of our ability on the world stage. That's the priority today and tomorrow. And then we'll go back to the drawing board and see where we're at on the other points that you mentioned.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the press conference.